Okay, day 97 of 100 Days of Visibility. Mm. So, what's particularly alive for me right now is the the mimetic war, the war, the one going on. The, there's kind of a I'll provide a little bit of context to start with. It's the the mental context and the orientation is important for anything I say to make sense. Um, and but the meat of this has to do with the fact that when I when I reach into the world and I touch this area, I notice myself going a little bonkers. I can feel the possession starting, and I can watch the way in which there's a forgetting that starts to happen. I am so much more conscious of all this than I used to, and it's all at the subtle level. So, to the extent that I'm anchored in the causal level, it has no power. And that's absolutely critical. But there are ways in which I'm not anchored there. That seems um, it's quite telling when I start to feel the hot winds of hell blowing in my own mind. It's um, it's intense. It's important. It's significant. So, for the bit of context, I've talked about this many times before, not in this series so much, but if you go back to my videos in August, um, which are probably easier to access on YouTube or on patreon.com/wiseknowing. I collected all of my posts and videos from August on the Patreon page, public facing. And so there's a way to frame what's going on that I think is very accurate. It just puts the perspectival, it puts the point of perspective in the wrong place to start there. Um, I'll go ahead and name the distortion, and then I'll see about dissecting it as I go through all of this. So, in many of the videos here, I've described the three bodies theory. I realized why I was confused about its origin. Apparently, it shows up in a lot of different places. Um, the um, the kayas, like the Dharmakaya in Buddhism, are referring to the same thing that in yogic philosophy are called the koshas. These are the bodies. Um, I'm not going to rehash the whole thing. I'll just highlight the essentials here. The idea is basically that there are three bodies. We have our physical body, often called the gross body, um, or I forget the Sanskrit for it, but in yogic philosophy, it's literally called the food body. Oh, my microphone is way down here. See if that's going to improve the sound a bit. So you have the physical body, or the food body, so the literal Sanskrit for that. And then above that, or around it more subtly, you have the subtle body. In Western esotericism, this gets subdivided into two pieces, which is the etheric and the astral. But they're both um, like fuzzy bodies. They're sometimes the dream body is sometimes considered to be the body that you have when you're in a visualization, when you're in a dream, when you're doing path working in Hermetic Kabbalah, for instance. If you have no idea what those terms are, that's fine. But the subtle level is the one where you experience beauty and you're touched by it. When you see a sunset, you hear music, and it moves you. And that's the subtle level. The subtle level is the room you're in comfortable? It's a more subtle quality than is there brown in the room? Is there a bed? Like, these are very physical levels. There's a subtle level of, is the room comfortable? What's the aesthetic flavor of the room? And the causal level, and corresponding to that, the organs for experiencing that being the causal body. the who you are that interacts with the causal level. And that's the eternal. That is stillness. And you experience that as you're looking out at this video from behind your eyes, like your eyes are windows. That point of perspective is behind everything. It's behind feeling, it's behind thought. It's like as in farther back. It is more subtle than the subtle level. Same place as intention. When you choose to move your fingers, where does the choice come from? So that's coming from the causal level. There's a reason why it's called causal. As long as you're working within time, it is as far back in time as you can go for things to have effects that is the cause. It's the closest thing to free will you can actually experience. It is the emptiness that everything is in and is made of. So you don't need to know these in full detail. It's like the fast forward version. These are meant to describe structures of experience. They're what I refer to as paradigm independent. That you there's a way to map what this is talking about into any paradigm that allows for any worldview, any belief system that allows for your own experiences. Any worldview that doesn't allow for your own experiences is going to be unstable or is going to tend to induce significant amounts of some version of psychosis or craziness or mind lock, inability to function. So if your worldview is rich enough that it can tie to your senses, then there's a way for this to map in high fidelity into that paradigm. But it doesn't matter. You don't have to explain it in terms of neurology or in terms of structures of consciousness or in terms of the will of God or whatever. These structures are there. You can experience them. You can learn to experience them. So in that sense, paradigm independent. More true than belief. So most minds excuse me. Most minds are tuned to reflect just the physical level, a little bit of the subtle, a little bit of pieces of the subtle. People care about freedom. What's freedom? Where's freedom? Well, and then the emphasis is to try to define it in terms of what you can see at the physical level. It's people being able to choose what they want to do, and like, okay, well, that's is describing something about the flow of free will into the physical world. But how do you know when people are free? People can vote. Really, that's not. I mean, what if we make everybody vote for a specific candidate at gunpoint? Oh, that's not real voting. Okay, well, what's real voting? Like, so people getting washed in these definitional things and getting confused about them is because of the need to perceive the subtle level through its manifestations at the physical. When you attune your senses to be able to experience the subtle level directly, you don't need all of these markers at the physical level. They'll show up and you can use them. But it's sort of like trying to navigate a city only by looking at shadows on the ground. There's a kind of silliness when if you learn how to look up and look around, you don't need the shadows anymore, and you recognize how low fidelity they were for helping you to navigate, and that there's actually a lot more that you can work with. And in fact, the shadows are not that interesting. They're an effect of something that is much, much more important. The subtle level is in terms of cause and effect, in terms of if you want to make changes, if you want to notice what's real and what's true. Focusing on the shadows is going to just leave you very confused. Modification of Plato's allegory of the cave, and you like that one. So as you, like each of three pieces, as you build sensitivity to the subtle level, as you cultivate the ability to hold charge at the subtle level, if I said subtle in the first case, sense the subtle level, hold charge at the subtle level, and get your mind to reflect the subtle level. These are like the three key pieces for the subtle realm opening up for you, being something you can navigate, being able to touch the spirit world. It sounds much more esoteric and weird than it really is. It's uh, it's the lived thing. You live it all the time. It's just it's like talking about relationships. Relationships are very real. They're just um, like my relationship with my girlfriend is a very real thing, but a thing at what level? It's not a thing like her body or my body. And it's not just about the patterns of speech between us. Those are parts of how the relationship manifests. Being able to feel the relationship itself, to feel its quality, its texture, the way that it shifts and moves in each moment with its own quality. It's an essential attribute for being able to work out her and my dynamics and to be able to enjoy her presence and for her to be able to enjoy mine is to attend to the health of the relationship. Same thing. That's just working at the subtle level. Um, if you develop subtle senses a little bit and then you work with plant medicine ceremonies like psychedelics, um, and you start talking with the intelligence of the medicine, you get a very clear idea of, oh, okay, this is referring to something. It's referring to something that's real in some very important sense. Whether that real is, oh, there is an actual like consciousness that is in the ayahuasca vine or whatever. I mean, yeah, you can trivialize it. You can say, well, according to physics, X would be impossible, and you're talking about X. Therefore, what you're talking about is stupid. Well, okay. If you're going to play that game, just don't listen to me, because that means that you're looking for ways to trivialize what I'm saying. I'm talking about things that are the ground of experience and are generally paradigm independent, as paradigm independent as I know how to note them. But it's hard to speak without a paradigm. And some paradigms are a lot cleaner and clearer than others at saying certain things. So talking about the spirit world, this actually nails something that physics is horrible at. It's utterly horrible at describing. The same way physics is utterly horrible at describing a good marriage. You just don't do it with physics. It's the wrong language. It's not a description of physics being wrong. It's a description of physics being the wrong tool. You don't do that. It's stupid. So there's a certain point of development. I mean, this varies from person to person. There's a lot of nuance to it, but there's a certain point of development where, as you refine your awareness of the subtle realm, and you learn how to touch it, to feel it, to smell it, to watch its dynamics, and especially if you cultivate your mind so that you can understand the dynamics of any world, you recognize that the dynamics of the subtle world have a lot in common with the physical world. What I mean by that is, for instance, and most key, the law of evolution applies every bit as much at the subtle level as it does at the physical level. This is hardly surprising, but we're like this is the field of memetics was an attempted creation of a scientific study of the subtle realm. It could have been that. Unfortunately, they didn't actually understand what they were studying, and they devoured themselves in the misunderstanding of their own metaphors. So as a result, it sort of splintered and lost favor. But if you come in with clarity and you look around, what a meme is, the problem being that the word meme, like this word has gone through so much morphing and evolution, a lot of transformation. But originally, when Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, he meant it in analog to a gene. So the way that a gene at a physical level produces a protein, and a gene is part of the code of a genome, which is the whole genetic code for producing an organism. So he was suggesting that, well, there are behavior patterns that we see with things like ideas, like Christianity. How does Christianity exist? Well, clearly, Christianity somehow transmits from one mind to another. So what is it that is transmitting? Well, it's some piece of code. Let's call that piece of code, like the way that there's a code in biology. Well, here's a code in thought space, in mind space. So with the M, um, like like I assume he got this from like mnemonics, which there's an extra N in there. M-N-E-M-O, the mnemonics anyway. Um, so he just morphed the word gene to refer to meme, which is the piece of code that's transmitting from one mind to another. And what killed the field of memetics was basically that nobody could agree on exactly what a meme is. So where exactly is the code? This is roughly the same issue as um, criticizing an early attempt to create a field of biology, because what exactly do you mean by, like, what? It's like saying, what is the piece of information you are studying when you are opening up a frog? You're looking at anatomy, yes, but what exactly are you defining to be an organ? It's stupid, because you can look at a frog, you can do the dissection, you can watch its behavior, you can look at its mating patterns, you can learn things about how the frog works without knowing anything about DNA. DNA appeared in the 20th century. Biology existed for long before that. So the same kind of error is happening here. It's just that, oh, well, clearly genetics is the defining, the understanding of DNA and how genes work is the crowning achievement. It's it's like the fundamental theorem of calculus defined calculus. Well, genetic theory and evolution, those two components together define biology. Well, no. It turns out that even if there weren't DNA, evolution would still work. Right? That's a really important observation. That it so happens that physical living creatures use DNA in order to transmit a kind of code from one instance to another. Um, it's hard. It's a little tricky for me off the top of my head to imagine a different way that physical things could have done this. Um, but that doesn't mean it can't be thought out. I haven't given it like 5 minutes of thought. The law of evolution doesn't really care about referring to DNA. It's much more general, and that's really key, because it applies to memes. So in the same way, the thing that brings interest to the domain of uh, memes is not, oh, well, there's an analogy to gene. It's that there's an analogy to organism. There's something like frogs and bacteria and lizards and amoebas that, like, you can study different kinds of entities in the physical world. Well, you can study different kinds of things in the subtle world as well. There are subtle entities. When the result of the equivalent of a genome in meme space, an example of this, what are usually called memeplexes, or clusters of memes. You're sort of being vague here about it. It's like multicellular organisms when you're viewing a cell, a single-celled organism, as a meme. Where exactly is the cell? What exactly is the boundary? Whatever. But you can look at the life cycle of these things. You can observe their life cycles just fine. You can see, for instance, that the life cycle of Catholicism involved all of these specific stages for raising children through the process. Like, this is a very common trend you'll see whenever there is a long-lived behavior pattern going across generations, that one of the things that that behavior pattern focuses on is a very specific way of educating children, often in a way that the children find boring or traumatizing. There's a systematic reason for it. There's an evolved reason for it, because the laws of evolution apply at the subtle level just as much as the physical. And the fact that thought can happen faster and can evolve faster than physical matter is part of the reason why the world is kind of nuts now. We're going through a global memetic war. It's sort of like yeah, my biological history, my ancient biological history, like dawn of life, is weak. So I'm not quite sure exactly what period this would have been, but this is akin to the ancient primordial soup, and there being a time period where the resources available seem to be scarce, and there's an evolved. Actually, this is more the important part. There's an evolved mechanism that a bunch of um, the these ancient forms of life, the single-celled organisms, have figured out, which is if they can attack other organisms and destroy them, then there's more resource for those cells. They're not reasoning this through, but it's an evolved strategy that works okay. We're dealing with the same thing at the subtle level right now. A huge number of these subtle parasites are operating at the level of approximately primordial soup. They're using our intelligence because it's here, but the parasites themselves are incredibly stupid. They don't care. Their job is to survive. They're just executing. There are some that are very smart. And um, this is perhaps stepping into some very controversial territory, but it's true. You can find actual intelligences in the subtle realm. You can find some that, um, across some axes, quite clearly dwarf what human beings track. It's just that what they prioritize is quite a bit different. Um, I mean, it's sort of like I don't know, like my my calculator can dwarf my intelligence when it comes to calculating. I'm not too worried about it taking over the world. It's just, oh, okay. So the reason for naming all of this is that almost everything everyone cares about today in loud conversation. Like if you, God forbid, turn on the news and listen to it, or you get updates from Twitter, or you get involved in whatever controversy is going through um, Facebook or whatever. Like I don't care if you whatever kind of controversy comes up. The thing that makes people care about it is not that it matters. Most of these things don't matter. Now, you can take any given topic and you apply what I just said to that, and somebody's going to get offended. Because offense is one of the strategies that these things have evolved to use in human bodies and minds in order to propagate. So it can be very easy to interpret, because this is one of the other things these parasites do. They encourage a kind of rounding ideas and claims to the nearest uncharitable version so that it can be attacked in your own psyche to create alarm, or to create a way to see, oh, but you're getting this thing wrong. Here's this thing that you don't know. If you just flipped that heuristic, if you assume that everything every person says has some sort of deep, profound wisdom for you in this moment, and your only job is to listen and to generously understand, it would be a lot harder to get offended. But that strategy um, does not propagate well in a subtle, violent context. You have to get good at rising above the subtle primordial soup, or the subtle battleground. Breathe in the stillness of the causal realm. From the stillness, it's very easy to see. The way that it is possible to clearly know anything and to clearly recognize that you know nothing. Maybe. And that's okay. Crystal clear. Very simple. But as long as we don't cultivate that, We're swimming in the soup. We're swinging our we're swinging our subtle broadswords in this screaming battle across the eons here, fighting this ridiculous war on the archetypal plane. Like the absurdity, just the sheer absurdity that um, that your personal offense or your personal sense of importance can overpower a god. Right? And here it's hard to convey clearly what I mean by God. Um, I'm I'm talking about things like there's an interesting example of how Western culture, like European culture, conquered the world. Right? So that was the movement of an intelligence, something that would be fair to call a god, reaching across the world. And in many cases, this was with a very positive intent. This is something that's important to notice, to track, and to remember. It was with immensely positive intent. They were spreading Christendom. They were spreading civilization. They were going into all of these corners like backwater India and Africa and those indigenous, I don't know what the term they were using for them. It's not coming to mind right now. I know it's somewhere, but I don't care that much. But savages, yes, they're calling them savages, dealing with the savages in all of these, like the islands in the Americas, uh, and these poor people don't understand the immense power of Christendom and of civilization. And we can go and educate these people and uplift them and help pull them out of this lesser way of being that is like scraping in the dirt um, and still struggling with agriculture and not even being able to read or to understand the higher arts of literature and the arts and sciences, bringing civilization to the world. Now, there's something important to notice about that. Of like, we can look back now and go, there are some things they were doing that were really dickish, but it didn't look like dickishness to them at the time. To some of them, I'm sure it did, but okay. To the individuals, a lot of them, I think, were just going along with the ride. No one person, as far as I know, there may have been cases where there was one person, but for the most part, there was no one person who had control over whether the Western god reached across the world and took it over. And it did so with blind care, with something that falls into Cartman's drama triangle as the rescuer pattern, um, among other things. Some of it was just rationalization for taking resources that they felt like they then deserved. Then you fast forward a few hundred years from that whole process, and today, Western civilization is very ill. Why is that? Well, there are competing gods who have arisen in order to tear it down. Some have explicitly named Western civilization as its enemy. Communism is a clear example. Communism, birthed from the mind of Karl Marx, but he didn't make it wholesale. Marx is giving a very, very particular critique of the what John Vervaeke calls the meaning crisis. He was highlighting, look, we can't just philosophize our way out of this struggle. The struggle has to work itself out at the level of conflict. There needs to be a way of dealing with this conflict, and it needs to happen in terms of power struggles. And there's sort of an inevitable arc that people can participate in, so there's a way to feel meaning by engaging in the revolution. So Marx is trying to address a very specific issue with in the wake of the Western machinery. But what it evolved into, because the thing that was most successful at spreading is not necessarily Marx's idea with the nuances. It was the thing that could spread best. Law of evolution at the subtle level. So communism became a like part of the whole machinery of the Soviet Union. The Cold War, in a very important sense, was a battle between the Western God and the communism God. That's what it was about. And the communism God was too young and too weak to feed itself. It wasn't grounded enough in truth, and it starved its own resources. That's why the Soviet Union collapsed. But it didn't kill communism, though. It still spread into China. North Korea is communist because this God reached down. The whole reason we had the Korean War, the United States went into the Korean War, was to stop communism. It was part of the ongoing struggle between these two subtle entities. This is just one example. Now, as an individual, looking across this battle, this war, this is a war. It's not just, and I want to be clear in saying this, I'm not trying to say that one side is better than the other or that we need to go with one versus the other. I'm describing a reality that you can feel. If you actually go to a communist country, you can feel the difference. You can feel the subtle resonance shift. And it's so much different from, like, I've been to all kinds of places around the world, not so much in Asia. But the I've been to quite a few places, but the there's something important about the the flavor, like the flavor of Peru, right? Which, like, that's like, how westernized is the Sacred Valley? Well, it's pretty westernized. Like they're using, like, there's English all over the place. They're speaking Spanish. Spanish is a Western language. Right? They're using Western style infrastructure, and I had Wi-Fi all over the place. So, like, this is pretty darn westernized. And so you feel into that and go, okay, so that's that. And contrast that with Cuba. It's difficult for Americans to get into Cuba, but, like, if you actually go there, there's the subtle feeling, like, Peru is more like the United States in a lot of ways than Cuba is. At the subtle energetic level, like what the soul of each person is like. Like there's these are dramatic differences across the board. Anyway, you're dealing with the great grandchildren of all kinds of different deities, and in fact, and I'm using the term God very loosely. These are egregores. These are fantastically strong, subtle beings, right? Titans, if you will. There's a way to track the relationship between myth and what these things are. But the point is that you can actually experience them, you can track them, you can feel them, you can see them, you can watch their movements. You can notice what happens when an individual pisses off one of these things. Right? That's basically what happened to Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson was too big and moved in a direction that was unacceptable to one of these beings. Well, several of them. There's a cluster. There's like a family of them. The thing that we call cancel culture is not actually a specific. It's not a specific memeplex. It's not even a specific meme. It's more like a meme family. It's like a species of meme. It's a strategy. A strategy tends to collect loosely around left ideas, American left ideas, but because of the structure of cancel culture, that's not the thing that makes it survive. This is why cancel culture is actually dangerous. It has nothing to do with the causes. It has nothing to do with racism or trans rights or anything like that. It has nothing to do with that. The issue is that cancel culture, the thing that we're trying to point at, the thing that some people, including me, are trying to point at when naming cancel culture is actually about the mimetic strategy. and the fact that when you actually track at the subtle level what this thing is doing, it has no loyalty to any idea. It has no loyalty to any form of decency, and it will serve any master that is a little bit more clever than it is and can just direct it a little bit. This means it is basically guaranteed to become a weapon in the hands of something atrocious. Utterly, horrendously atrocious. Right? That's the real problem with cancel culture. But it's hard to see because most people are too busy being pawns in the information war. They're too busy getting possessed by memes. That's what they do. That's how they live. That's how they spread. Not all of them, but the most common ones right now. So I'm looking across this whole thing, and over the last many months, since about September, I had taken a step back and gone, okay, something's really screwy here. Because I was trying to spell this out in a way that people could clearly understand. Because I was thinking, okay, excuse me, maybe I could just name this, point it out, and then people could see it, could feel it, we could address it. The part that I wasn't tracking. And this gets back to my caveat earlier when I said I'm going to say the thing and it's going to be distorting because the perspective is wrong. The thing I was missing is that the place I was coming from in order to name all of this stuff was encouraging a view that was itself feeding a range of these beings. So there's a way to feel when you're feeding you call it an astral entity if you like, a mind virus, a parasite, a demon. I think that there's a way to distinguish one of these from another. I think that it makes sense to talk about certain kinds of archetypes, which are subtle beings, manifest, like the archetype of the god of war, the archetype of the goddess of love and beauty. These are tangible forces that you can feel if you pay attention to them. This is no less strange than like when you understand what I'm talking about, not just mentally, but you actually can feel it. It's no less strange than saying you can feel jazz, you can feel classical music, you can feel hip hop. This is not just an abstraction. I'm not claiming that there's some sort of etheric essence of these things floating around. I'm saying that there is a real thing you can experience. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. It's just that most people have not cultivated the senses needed to track reality at a subtle enough level to recognize that when Carl Jung was talking about archetypes, this is not just a fancy theory. This is not something that he derives from looking at physical evidence. That's not how this works. Science works by looking at the world and trying to make sense of how can I overcome my own foolishness and see what the actual truth is of what's going on. When you pay attention, you can come to recognize that your input of what you are looking at, what is the basis of your information, doesn't have to be limited to the objects that your culture knows how to name. That's the beginning of magic. Real magic, the type of magic that can actually transform your life, that can transform the world within certain laws that you can learn to experience. Because this is applying Clarke's law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. What does advanced mean? It means you're working with forces that others cannot understand from their current vantage point. So if you can actually touch an archetype and speak to it and work with it and work within its laws, and you can feel why the subtle level consistently is causally farther upstream than the physical level, then you can create transformations that manifest at the physical level. You're not going to defy the laws of physics, probably. Maybe. in expectation, it's generally a good move to assume you're not going to violate laws of physics. But the laws of physics are terrible at describing the actual causes of the things that we care about. Just like you don't use physics to describe a marriage. That's not how it works. It's the wrong level of abstraction. It's the wrong type of abstraction. So the puzzlement that this piece that I'm working with. So in this bit, I'm talking about, like I titled this, "The Madness of Subtle War." I'm noticing how, as I step forward a little bit more and I start to draw lines, and I'm saying, this is a boundary of my space. Like, that actually came from me stepping forward in the first place, going, okay, rather than just doing these live streams, I'm going to start saying things and putting forward things that I expect some people are going to disagree with. I expect may even surprise some people. And like why are you viewing it that way? It's interesting to see some people from the game B space looking at that going, wait, sounds like you're landing on one side of a culture war. Why are you doing that? I thought you were, like, I have a lot of respect for your views. This sounds much less meta than, or trans, in the sense of pre-trans fallacy, like much less trans perspectival than I'm used to from you. Like, okay. I suspect that what's going on there is that I'm actually staring at a level of truth that is a little hard to track. And also, a lot of the things that I'm pointing at, a lot of these parasites, and I'm jumping down to parasites because a lot of these are really small and stupid. A lot of these are incredibly mechanical. They're like mechanical spiders that crawl in your ear and fuck with your head and your senses. And so when you learn how to observe these, there's a sense of, it's not even smart. It's like a bacterium. That doesn't mean it's not effective, but it's a parasite. It feeds on your energies and it uses your intelligence in order to procreate. It uses your own mind to lay its eggs. Right? So just recognizing that, like, we're dealing with actual subtle parasites. So to notice that a lot of them take this strategy of whatever is said, filter it into these little boxes that you already know, and prefer to drop them into a space that either affirms what you know or allows you to reject it. This is a very powerful known phenomenon of the mind. The mind is an incredibly beautiful tool for isolating simulations from the rest of reality. Oh, I see. Hi, Sarah. It's nice to see you. So Sarah Quinlan says, I feel like you're so calm when you talk about stuff like this, whereas it makes me feel like the world is closing in around me. When I say stuff like this, quote unquote, stuff like this, I mean living in a time when questioning the mainstream narrative and thinking critically out loud feels more and more like the action that will get you kicked out of the tribe, so to speak. I'm guessing I feel more caught in the stream than you do. Yeah, so this is a practice. This is a really active practice for me. That's actually part of why I started stepping forward and going, here is what I think, here's what I have to say, here's what I'm naming, because I knew a bunch of these subtle parasites would react to my saying that by using the mouths and minds of a lot of people and try to spew their venom and their seeds at me, like to either make me go away or make me infected. And the process of learning how to be immune, it is a practice. It comes from cultivating a lot of core things. Like you and I are both in wealth, and so there's a lot of overlap there. A lot of the solvate coagula stuff that Carolyn Elliott talks about is related. But I've come to recognize solvate coagula is actually only very specifically talking about addressing current parasites that are in mostly the subtle realm, and alchemizing their power, dissolving them into their base components so that you can use that power to create something more intentionally. There's a core piece that Carolyn talks about sometimes, but I've come to recognize this is actually the core. Needing to anchor in something that is beyond the realms of sensation. She usually talks about this in terms of knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel being at Tifereth, etc. But when you actually anchor there, there's a beyond it all where you can do something that is analogous to Solveat Coagula and strengthen a way of being that actually cultivates immunity. And I'm not perfect. In fact, the entire point of this video is me highlighting, oh wow, I'm noticing ways that I'm getting activated as I'm reaching in, as I'm talking about some of this stuff. Not just here, but this has been true over the last couple of days. I've been tracking some impact that's been happening for me, and I've been watching the madness boot up in me. But by anchoring in the realm beyond form, by anchoring in the eternal, it becomes possible to orient to the madness even while it's happening. And then the alchemy is so much easier. It is so much easier. So I'll actually have more to say about that pretty soon. I'm putting together a program that's about training these things clearly. So I'll announce that both on Facebook and in Wealth. So I'm sure you'll see it. So the madness that I'm talking about, this sort of booting up of a kind of chaos, like I'm noticing this way that I feel a pull towards talking about this global war. And like there's this, I don't know how universal this is, but I want to highlight something about the energetics in me. When I say we are in a global information war, all this physical stuff is just the manifestation. All these issues, we talk about cancel culture, but this will just become a tool. There's like the threat of the destruction of free speech. There's all of this about people who are actually disadvantaged. Like there are actual issues of racism. And at the same time, we can't actually address the issues of racism because the methods by which we are doing them become tools for political machinations. And those machinations may not even be centralized. So we've got all of this chaos and all of this madness going around everywhere. And it all comes down to this business of we have to work with, we have to somehow figure out how to fight well in the subtle battleground. Right? So in playing with that, right, that was me entering a little bit more into the madness. Sounds good. But it's insane. It's utterly insane. It co-opts true things in service of madness. The madness there is that you can feel it. There's a, oh, I assume you can. After going into this, sometimes I'll just slide right out of tracking. Where is the point of control? Oh, right, it's right here. I am the I am. Takes a little bit to clean this out after it's activated. So I feel a kind of somatic activation. This sort of, it's like this thunderous movement and an anxiety, a type of we're so fucked, but maybe we can pull out a victory from the jaws of defeat, and we can cultivate power, and we can matter, and we can defy all of these things and feel this victory. And but notice that this is already sliding into, there's the same energies are still there, us versus them, fighting all of these creatures. oh, cancel culture, oh, this evil beast, or this cluster of beasts. We can be more precise, but it's bad. Can we dump serving goodness, have only that as their safety? Bruh, this is all complicated. How do we deal with it? It's insanity. The reason it's insane is not because each of these topics need to be dug into more. That's the illusion. The actual point of clarity recognizes these are pieces of our current evolution. Truth is untouchable by any of them. But stillness, presence, can cut straight through and isn't confusable. From the eternal, from feeling the space between all things, the stillness beyond all form and time, it is absolutely crystal clear that the field is compassion, that there is freedom of choice, that there is no mimetic infection that can actually control really anything. This is sort of like talking about how my muscles control my hand, but that's false. My muscles are the way in which my will moves my hand. The only way in which the muscles move the hand is if I'm not paying attention and a program runs on autopilot. With like finger tapping when I'm not thinking about it. That's a program. And then my muscles are moving my fingers. But it has no power. As soon as I pay any attention to it, it's mine. Within limits, within recognized truths. There's a lived clarity here. What I'm pointing at, what I'm looking at about, we've got this mimetic war. That's true. There's a place to stand, to see, to feel that comes from utter clarity, that rather than trying to stop war in the Middle East, rather than trying to stop war in the Middle Earth, the middle band of the subtle realm, instead there can be a recognition of, oh, that's actually a reflection of something deeper. It's like having muscle spasms. You can't sort out the muscle spasms by yelling at the muscles or by tensing the muscles a particular way. What addresses it is for consciousness to be there. At this point, it starts to sound even more woo or wiggy, because we live in a culture where the collective minds, each person's mind and the collective mind tends to focus almost entirely on the physical level. So the subtle level is hard to talk clearly about. It sounds fanciful or spiritually flaky or weird or mystical, but it's every bit as practical as when I'm talking about walking across the street in order to look at to be able to see the view of the city. Similarly, I can feel into the subtle dimension and recognize what kind of currents of thought and feeling are controlling the atmosphere I'm in, and how accurate my own senses are versus reflecting the buzz that's going on inside of me. It's every bit as practical. It's every bit, and in important ways, it's every bit as mechanical. When I'm talking about consciousness, it's just as clear. Truth rings like a loud bell whose note is silence. Feeling that. then we can talk sanely about what to do about all of these children fighting at the subtle level, at the global noetic war. It felt really good to work through. It helps me to talk through it. Helps my mind to calibrate. So, I'll wrap this up here. Thanks for watching.